Canadians are dying, almost 24 of them every single day, from fentanyl. Families are left shattered, communities are hollowed out, and while the government pats itself on the back for progress with its fentanyl czar, Kevin Brosseau, a closer look at what's going on reveals blacked out recommendations and the classic access to information excuse that telling Canadians the truth might injure international relations. Let's dig in. Today's report dives into a transmittal note sent to Brosseau from Gerald Peets, who works in the office of the Commissioner of the Fight Against Fentanyl, or the OCFAF. This cover sheet is used to formally send a document or package from one government official or office to another, and in this case, to Brosseau from Peets. And it details the scale of the problem. Over 50,000 Canadians dead from opioids in an 8-year span from 2016 to 2024, and the report claims that 74% of those involved fentanyl. It includes the April 2025 What We Heard report from the czar himself that acknowledged the Trump administration's intention to apply broad-based tariffs to Canadian imports due to the flow of contraband like fentanyl to the United States. While the czar claims the amount of illicit drugs flowing from Canada into the U.S. is negligible, he claims also that the reversal is true and that the volumes are far less than the flow of narcotics into Canada from the U.S. It kind of goes without saying here that Canada has been more than fair warned for nearly 2 full years that tariffs would be imposed if we didn't clean up this act.
Mr. Speaker, we are pretty fed up with this fight against evidence-based programs that actually are saving lives. We cannot allow the Conservatives to take us back to the failed ideology of the past. Even Harper's advisor, Ben Perrin, thinks they're speaking nonsense. So just stop it and save lives.
The report itself is full of the usual talking points like collaboration with the U.S., China as a source of precursors, domestic production ramping up, the need for stronger laws, better data sharing, and balanced supply and demand approaches.
Canada is a trusted partner in ensuring hemispheric security. This is a North American issue, frankly, fentanyl, with death and destruction being experienced in the U.S. as much as it is in Canada. And in passing on this latest data that I will be doing in person, will be showing that Canada's resolve to dealing with this crisis is in fact non-abating.
But if you want to parse out additional clues that came with these documents, good luck, because they're blacked out. That's right, Brosseau's second important takeaway is completely redacted. It begins with the words "we must" and then nothing. The exemption cited is Section 15(1) of the Access to Information Act. That's the one that lets the head of a government institution refuse to disclose information if its release could reasonably be expected to be injurious to the conduct of international affairs, the defense of Canada, or any state allied or associated with Canada. They're talking about combating fentanyl, calling for action, and yet the government decides that full transparency on that second key recommendation risks harming relations with the United States? I find that unlikely, and here's why. The report itself stresses deeper collaboration, shared threats, strike forces, and the fight that negligible volumes move north to south. So what else is left? Well, that leaves us with China, and to a lesser extent, India, which is also cited as a precursor source of these chemicals. These are the significant sources of precursors that organized crime diverts and turns into the poison killing Canadians in domestic labs, especially out west. Brosseau himself has said publicly that he's looking to collaborate with China, though he was careful to stress at that time that it's not an indictment of the Chinese government necessarily, just the chemical companies that are shipping the precursors. Okay, fine, but when the second major takeaway from the czar's own assessment gets blacked out under the international relations shield, you have to wonder, is the recommendation something that would actually pressure China harder, name names, demand real enforcement, or expose ongoing diversion that Ottawa prefers to soft pedal while chasing trade and partnerships? This is the same government that appointed this czar after U.S. pressure and tariff threats rolled out a $1.3 billion border plan, tabled bills for stronger tools, and keeps insisting Canada is a trusted partner. There has been some progress. Sure, overdose numbers are down in some places, but there is still an average of 21 people dying every single day. And in Edmonton, they say over 80% of all of their 911 calls are for overdoses. So while crackdown has happened, labs have been disrupted and precursors have been seized. All of that is good, but the crisis is still measured in those daily funerals. And law enforcement is clearly underprepared for the scale of this crisis. Frontline police and leaders and associations told the fentanyl czar exactly that. They said the criminals are adapting faster than our laws. Investigations into fentanyl trafficking, money laundering, and organized crime are complex, lengthy, and resource intensive, forcing agencies to make hard choices about which cases they can even pursue. A major bottleneck seems to be converting intelligence into evidence that will actually stand up in Canadian courts. Transborder data that could help disrupt this network and these networks is harder to access and use here than in many of our American counterparts. Meanwhile, the precursors keep flowing, domestic labs keep popping up, and the bodies, they keep piling up. Real progress is being made, they say, but only if the laws are finally modernized to match the speed and sophistication of the trade. Until then, Canadian enforcement seems to be fighting this with one hand tied behind its back. So when the recommendations that might actually force harder choices get redacted because they might offend an international partner, it leaves Canadians in the dark about what we must actually do. Secrecy under the banner of protecting relations doesn't protect the people dying on our streets. It protects the status quo. If the second takeaway is strong enough that revealing it risks injuring ties with a major precursor source, then maybe that takeaway is exactly what the public needs to see and what decision makers need to act on without the censorship. The full document lays out the scale of the problem. Domestic production rising as finished fentanyl imports shift, precursors pouring in, organized crime adapting faster than the bureaucracy, frontline voices from the likes of health workers, police, financial institutions, they were all consulted. And the report is riddled with themes of collaboration, scale, no single solution, so-called evidence-based responses. Yet the redaction on page 38 sits there like a neon sign that some truths are still too inconvenient for Ottawa's International Balancing Act. Canadians deserve the unredacted version. We deserve action that prioritizes stopping the poison over worrying whether Beijing or anyone else gets offended by clear language. We must do better than this. Censorship doesn't save lives, but real accountability and transparency just might. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. We've been following the crime, the chaos, the disorder plaguing Canadian cities and streets all across the country for years. If you'd like to find our reports on this topic and support our journalism on this file, please do so at fixourcities.com. That's fixourcities.com.